All right, good morning again, and welcome. I'm Jaleese Thomas, the Director of Research Health Equity for the Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative of Northern Ohio. It is an absolute pleasure to have this opportunity to share space with you and to talk about a topic that is incredibly important and something that we are all experiencing, aging. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Austin Tucker, a filmmaker, to the stage to start the film that we are watching this afternoon.
Thank you all for coming today. We're so happy to have you here. We also want to thank Case and Benjamin Rose for having us as well.
Let's see what you got, Grandpa. I heard you've been practicing.
I'm trying to.
How far can you throw?
Well, we'll have to see. I don't let you get back a little bit at least. Let's see what that does.
Not too bad. There you go. When was the last time that you threw?
When your father was a young boy?
15, 20 years ago?
Sure.
Not bad for 50 years, no practice.
No, I played baseball as a kid. I don't know if I was any good.
You're doing pretty good now.
Well, thank you.
What was your reaction when you found out that you were going to throw out the first pitch at the Guardians game on your birthday?
The same reaction I have now. Wow. Dr. Tucker.
All right, if we could give Dr. Tucker a round of applause. Before we begin our panel discussion, I'd just like to thank our third annual CTSC Health Equity Challenge Series Planning Committee, of which Dr. Sara Powers, Senior Research Scientist at Benjamin Rose, was a part of. She'll serve as this afternoon's moderator. And then if we could have our panelists up to the stage, Dr. Kylie Meyer, she's the Assistant Professor at Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing at Case Western Reserve University. Dr. Tucker, of course, and Austin Tucker, filmmaker. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here and for taking the time to discuss aging at its finest. We deeply appreciate the work that went into creating such a moving and insightful portrayal of the aging experience. Aging touches each of us in unique and profound ways. And I'd really like to just extend a special thanks to our panelists today for joining us. I feel incredibly honored to be able to be here to discuss these topics with you and just get your expertise and insights into all of these wonderful themes that we're going to jump into today. So let's dive in. All right. Austin, this first question is for you. What is most inspirational to you about your grandfather, Dr. Tucker's life?
I think just his desire to continue learning. I mean, there's so many things I can say, but his desire to keep going and continue learning and not letting obstacles get in his way. If I just break it down into even technology, it's never when he calls me, Austin, can you do this for me? It's can you show me how to do this? Because I want to be able to do this on my own. And he has so many different interests, and he's always passionate about different things. And even if it's something that he hasn't heard before, he doesn't know much about, he's very interested in learning more about it, and he gives it his all. So I think just that drive and that willingness to learn and that desire to learn new things is something that's remarkable and inspiring.
That gives us a great foundation to, explore all of these topics coming up. And from the oldest practicing physician in the world, Dr. Howard Tucker, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to explore all these topics with you. This next question, goes to Dr. Meyer. You're an assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University, Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing. And my understanding is that your research interests are in family caregiving, caregiving relationships, and financial well-being, really all aspects of aging that we'll all navigate at some point in our lives. What would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions about aging that you found through your research?
Research and teaching. You caught me at a good week. I get to teach my undergraduate nursing students in aging and health. We're talking about theories of aging right now. And one of the most striking things to me as I'm reading their papers, and I see this when I'm talking to caregivers too, is some of the assumptions and limitations we put on ourselves with aging. And I recognize those students who don't have an older adult in their lives. So I really admire that you have this relationship, that we have this intergenerational connection, because I can tell those students who haven't had models of aging and they take for granted these kind of outdated theories of disengagement. Oh, when you get old, you withdraw into yourself, you pull back from the world. Why? It doesn't have to be that way. There's no darn good reason. And so I think that's one of the misconceptions that a lot of our students have, and I think all of us have for ourselves, and we limit ourselves when we have those assumptions because we're doing that to ourselves in the future. That's the thing about ageism, is it harms us ultimately, right?
Great, thank you. Dr. Tucker, do you have what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about aging? What do you think are the biggest misconceptions about aging?
Misconception about aging is that you become senile, you can't think properly, certainly you can't walk as well, and your vision goes. It doesn't have to be that way, obviously. Yeah, that's my concept of life. Perpetual learning is the key to it. Whether it be a hobby or whether it be continuing to work, it keeps you young. And surround yourself with young people. They are inspiring.
Great, thank you so much. Austin, when you think about aging and the relationship you have with your grandfather, what is one of the most important lessons you've learned about family caregiving or caregiving relationships in general?
I think just watching my grandfather's story unfold is, I wasn't the primary caretaker or the one making decisions, but it's to find a balance. And, obviously you want to keep your loved ones safe and do what you think is right for them, but also take into consideration their perspective and their feelings and try to find some middle ground if it's suitable for that situation. Find middle ground and find something that works for everyone so that everyone can feel comfortable. I think, to Kylie's point, there's a lot of misconceptions about aging, and I actually found it quite interesting that you see it all. So with all the negatives of social media now, you're seeing a lot of great examples of what aging can be, and as my grandfather said as well, just it doesn't have to be that you're going back to work or working a full-time job. You can be engaged and doing something that keeps you busy. I think, being open to giving your whether it's your parents or your grandparents, and give them the space and that opportunity to find something that they enjoy. I think it helps everyone through that aging process.
Great, thank you. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to all of these wonderful answers as we navigate our own potential caregiving situations. So shifting gears a little slightly, Dr. Tucker, you've experienced race or ethnic discrimination as a result of being Jewish, which was mentioned a lot in the past hour and a half. We're seeing some of those same sociopolitical climate elements in 2024. What advice do you have for people whose diverse identities may mean the difference between surviving life and thriving in life?
Well, the first consideration is you must maintain your own feeling of integrity. One must recognize that hate is inherent. It's built into us. And the key is to master it and harness it. You know, we go back, Oedipus killed his father. Jacob and Esau had their differences. I was on a committee to work for a senator with Benjamin Spock. Dr. Spock was the go-to pediatrician in terms of his book, Rearing Children. And he said to me, sibling rivalry. My mother said to me, Benjamin, I'm so happy you and your brother don't have any sibling rivalry, which she read in his book. And he said, here we were fighting all the time and wrestling, but she didn't consider that sibling rivalry. More recently, I think the best example of it more recently was a man named Westbrook Pegler. He was truly a Neanderthal writer. He was a Scripps Howard paper. Cleveland had 3 newspapers at that time, and Scripps Howard was one of them. And Pegler, as I say, to the right even of Attila the Hun, he was, one of his columns was that he opposed the anti-lynching bill that was before Congress at the time. He was that remarked. But he did write one column, which I appreciated. He said that with the wars and people cruel to each other, there were 2 men left on earth, and one killed the other, and then there was no hatred. Of course, self-hatred is always there. And it's important to remember that if you're prejudiced if you're prejudiced against, if people are against you, this is their problem. You have your own integrity. When I was applying for medical school, 50% of the applicants were Jewish. They took 0 to 8%. There was a man in school ahead of me, senior at Case, was the reserve then, who was a remarkable man, Jewish, president of his class, president of his fraternity, first man on the tennis team, and Phi Beta Kappa, the National Scholastic Society. He made it 3 years. Most people make it in 4. He was rejected from the medical school. I didn't have that problem. I went into a meeting. They told me to wait in the hallway, and I came back and I was accepted. That's a funny story associated with that. The man, one of the interviewers, I heard, always looked to see if he had dirty fingernails. So I went downtown, had nails manicured, and would you believe it? Before we went back in the room where they accepted me, he, sitting in the hall with me, looked at my fingernails, see if my fingers were appropriate. But by that time, I was accepted. The prejudice persists. How do you avoid it? To succeed in yourself, work hard. Cleveland Clinic was notorious. So was Western Reserve, as I just told you. Cleveland Clinic hired a Jew in 1921 when they opened their doors. The next one was me in 1949. I suspect that both of us were selected because they had trouble filling the spots. You don't see much of that anymore. It began with World War II, when the armies and armed forces opened up and put people in med school who were less talented or less studious. My advice to people is to maintain your own sense of security, your own sense of integrity, and absorb the recognition that prejudice is always going to be here in some form or another.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think you've really highlighted not only the importance of identity, integrity, and resilience, but thank you so much for sharing that history. On a similar note, based on looking at different age kind of categories included in research and looking at how this may line up in medical research, Dr. Meyer, according to a 2022 study published in JAMA regarding participation of older adults in clinical trials for new drug applications, as well as biologics license applications from 2010 to 2019, adults ages 75 years and older were not enrolled in proportion to the prevalence of selected treatment indications, while participants, on the other hand, between the ages of 60 to 75 years of age were reasonably proportional with the prevalence of selected treatment indications. How, in your experience, can researchers be intentional about designing research studies for inclusion of older adults?
Oh, sure. Make me answer after Dr. Tucker's great answer there. Absolutely. So this is something that we think about a lot as researchers, where we're always told that we want to have a representative sample, because if we don't have sample representative in our studies, that means that the findings aren't going to be generalizable. And especially when you have research that could potentially benefit the health of our society, that's really concerning. We want our findings to benefit, whether it's at the basic science level or you're testing a new clinical a drug or an intervention. And so not having older adults, people of all ages, in these study samples is concerning, because it means that our science isn't benefiting our society. You know, you're paying as a taxpayer into these studies done by the NIH, and yet you're not benefiting necessarily from the findings. So what do we do? Well, one, I want to point out something that we're doing well. And when you submit a National Institutes of Health application, they ask you about any kind of eligibility criteria you have related to age. And you're asked to justify those criteria. And those reviewers are going to go through the application and go, hey, that's not a good justification to have an age cutoff here. You better think better about that, right? So good review process is important. I think there's also an importance on the part of researchers to make research more accessible. Some of our studies aren't always going to be enjoyable to participate in, and there's not much we can do about it. Sometimes, you know, those spinal taps are not the most fun things to do if you're doing Alzheimer's research, for example. But are there ways that we could, you know, meet people in their home environment rather than making them come to a clinic and go, you know, find the parking to get to the, you know, the research study and so on? Are there ways that we can use our study materials, make them more accessible, our consent forms in more age-friendly fonts that, you know, might have bigger print for somebody with visual impairments that we tend to see among older adults? So I think there's a lot we can do, both on the regulation side and on the accessibility side from researchers.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Dr. Tucker, as a current faculty member of Case Western Reserve University teaching both medicine and law, what parallels do you see between medicine and law that promote support and resources for adults across the lifespan?
That's a hard question. I think both work to improve people's being and their health and their security. The computers have broadened people's education so that they can understand better their medicine and even their law. And of course, they go to resources and come up with diagnoses and understanding of the legal process. But both professions strive to improve one's being.
Thank you. This next question question is for Austin. When you think about the potential that your grandfather's life can have on how people view aging, what comes to mind about the power of art forms for storytelling to help bring awareness to topics like aging that may not receive as much attention?
Yeah, I think this also goes back to what Dr. Meyer was speaking about earlier. I think there's this preconceived notion of what aging is. But now we're in this very interesting time with social media and even in film where you're seeing people representing aging in a positive light and what aging can be. There was like this great June Squibb movie that came out. She's in her 90s, just recently came out. You're seeing all over the internet, not just grandpa, but plenty of people who are older and are sharing their lives on social media and what they're out and about doing and sharing their hobbies. And it's bringing this new meaning of aging to the younger generation. It's sort of getting away from that idea that aging has to be bad. But I think it's starting this movement where we're celebrating aging and embracing it as opposed to seeing it as this negative thing. So I think we're in this very interesting time. Again, with all the negatives of social media and the internet, it's a great way for people to see and reevaluate their own thoughts about aging.
Thank you. And I guess just to follow up with that, with social media now and seeing in the film how TikTok has exploded and really helped, how has that experience been and how does it continue to transform as now you have this beautiful, example of your grandfather's life and Dr. Tucker's life and how is that going to progress, do you think?
Yeah, I think we originally started posting just behind the scenes content on social media just to have it populated. And we could never have imagined just how big of a reception we would have by the younger generation who wanted to learn more about his life and what it means to age, and what he's seen throughout his years and his wisdom and all these fantastic questions we received. So we sort of pivoted our social media platform to answer some of those questions and create content around what people were asking about. And I think it's just part of this bigger movement that you're seeing online, where you're getting contributions from people, older people in the community who still have a lot to say, and social media is allowing them to, share their voices and share what they've seen and what they know because they have so much to contribute. So I think moving forward, even after the film, we're going to continue building content on that page and using it as this resource and hopefully bringing on more people as well to share their stories.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add to that with social media or caregiving? Dr. Meyer?
Honestly, I am so excited for this film to be widely available because I can't wait to teach my students with it. I've actually thought about if I could get Case Western to approve a class where I teach on Grace and Frankie. I don't know if anybody watched that series. Oh, it's a good. But we need more content like this, and it's so important. So thank you for everything that you've been putting together.
All right. So one of our last questions is for everybody on the panel. Dr. Tucker, you gave some really poignant advice for living a long life, which includes don't hate, don't smoke cigarettes, and be happy. So what is one takeaway that you'd like the audience to consider about aging?
Well, we're into the topic of longevity. We have to talk in terms of longevity as in the parameter of the life expectancy. Now, in 1900, it's hard to believe, life expectancy was 33 years of age. So if you were 40 or 50, you then were considered to have lived a long life. Now, of course, life expectancy is 78. When does senility begin? It's too subjective and not appropriate to consider this. My advice, as you just mentioned, no cigarettes. Cigarettes were popular. Even residents are surprised when I tell them that doctors used to sit on the bed smoking and the patient would be smoking. You would go to a medical meeting, you couldn't see the projected screen because of the blue haze of the cigarettes. Doctors would tell patients, smoke. It'll curb your appetite and quiet your nerves. In 1947, I recognized this because Alton Oxner from the Oxner Clinic in New Orleans, a smaller version of Cleveland Clinic, presented my class with statistics. The generation before mine, the few women who smoked only at home, in the house, nothing in public. If they smoked in public, they were considered hussies. And at that point, women were thought to have breast cancer and men lung cancer. But as soon as women started smoking, the incidence of lung cancer escalated, and parallel lines. Smoking and lung cancer were parallel patterns. So, then hatred. Unless you're physically abusing someone, hatred is more damaging to you. When you look at someone with hate, your blood pressure goes up, your pulse goes more rapidly, your intestines go tight. It's worse on you. So curb your hatred. And happiness is a key to longevity. Find ways to keep happy and not depressed.
Thank you.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is, just keeping your mind active and whether that be wanting to learn a new skill or a new hobby or continue working or just doing a puzzle, just keeping the mind active and your brain active and being open to learning new things. I think, I see it in action with him every day. So that's my takeaway for him is just, keeping the mind young and mind active. It's my biggest takeaway.
Absolutely, and I think this is just reiterating what I think has been said before, but not placing limitations on yourself or on the people that you love about, what age should look like. Age can look like a lot of things, and it's not denying that there are age-associated conditions, that you are more at risk as at an older age of experiencing Alzheimer's. Now, that's not a normal part of aging, but recognizing that just because somebody has a change in their ability, that doesn't mean that they necessarily can't. Can't is also a product of our environment, our resources, the people around us, our support. So, changes in a person's ability to drive. We have Uber now. We have to match our resources around us with what our current needs are. So aging can look like a lot of different things. And I'll just close with, something that I hear a lot, or we talk about a lot with our caregivers, is this saying, we want freedom for ourselves and safety for the people that we love. And, when you're young, and maybe you're taking care of an older adult, maybe you're emphasizing that safety. I want to protect. And we don't have the wisdom of sitting in the shoes of an older person unless we sit and listen, unless we have these intergenerational conversations and go, hey, you're making some assumptions here. We get to negotiate. This is something we negotiate, safety and liberty.
Thank you all so much. I don't know if we have time for questions in the audience. Yep. If anybody would like to ask a question, I can come around with the microphone. If you come up to the podium, if you have any questions for any one of our panelists. Yeah.
It's small enough.
Okay. Sounds good.
My name is Laura. I'm the senior transportation.
Please use the microphone.
Oh.
Thank you. There's one on each side.
Thanks for being here. This was great. Curious about your thoughts on what the government should be doing, whether it's local, state, federal, that it isn't doing now that could be more helpful to older adults.
I'm so sorry, you said you were from transportation?
Sorry. I'm from Senior Transportation Connection.
Senior Transportation Connection, wonderful. I think the government should be providing funding and support for transportation options, the kind of transportation options that you would want for yourself. So we can sit here and say, yeah, there are options if you can't drive. Are those the options that you would want for yourself at any age? So we have to look at what those are and make them more robust, because we know, especially in a city like Cleveland, I'm from Metro Detroit, the Motor City, so we are so dependent on cars, and I think it's, as pointed out in the documentary, it's essential to our independence. So that's a key one.
Many people, as they age, say, aging is not for sissies. They regret getting older. My very wise father said, well, first of all, he had a disease called Patter's disease. His one shin was twice the size of the other, which meant that the skin was being stretched. And he is in chronic pain, but he just smiled and said, well, if I had died 20 years ago, I wouldn't have this problem today. And that carries me through much of the time. My eyes aren't as good as they were, my walking is off, but I accept all this. And that's my advice, accept aging as it is. It's a downward process, but don't be afraid of it, and don't be afraid of dying.
Great, thank you.
Well, all right. What an afternoon. Let's give another round of applause to our moderator, panelists, and to all of you for being here with us this afternoon. And we wish you well and wellness. All right, take care.